Hi, everyone, and welcome into another edition of Navigating Trump 2.0. This is the show that takes a look at the week that was in Washington, D.C. through the lens of the second Trump administration. I'm your host, John Stolness, and I'm joined once again this week by CBN News chief political analyst David Brody and host of CBN's Quick Start podcast, Dan Andros. Hey, guys, let's get into the latest in Minneapolis. Lots happened since we talked last. Seems to me there's been a little bit of a shakeup. I think the president admitted to as much that this week when he was talking about sending his border czar, Tom Homan, to Minnesota. There's also seeming to have been a bit of a shift in tone with regard to the Trump administration's immigration enforcement in Minnesota. Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem and Border Patrol Commander Greg Bovino, they're no longer running things in Minnesota. And Homan told reporters on Thursday, the first time he spoke to the press since becoming the point man, that he was looking to de-escalate and ramp down the surge that's been taking place there over these last few weeks. He also said the mission will focus now on targeted searches, and he's going to be going after criminals, known criminals who are also illegal aliens. So, David, it seems to me by implication that there appears to be some admission that what ICE has been, the way they've been conducting their raids and doing things in Minneapolis and Border Patrol enforcement as well, the way things have been happening, the roving groups of officers going around and staking out schools and neighborhoods, it sounds that Tom Homan wants to rein some things in and draw down the number of officers that are there in Minnesota. I wanted to get your reaction to what we've seen over the last week there.
Yeah, that's accurate. This is the way I frame it. It's a testosterone recalculation. Well, it's true.
Fair. That's fair.
So I like to kind of dumb it down. Not for the audience, by the way, for me.
For me. Yeah.
For me, that's clearly for me. But that's what it is. And look, let me get into some of the particulars. I can't name the sources, but I've been talking to some sources within the administration, well, I'll leave it at the administration. And here's what's going down. This is what I can tell you for sure. There is a disagreement in the administration. You've got folks like Stephen Miller, Kristi Noem, Corey Lewandowski also, by the way, is an advisor to Kristi Noem at DHS. They have the quantity first approach, get as many as you can, get the numbers up. Let's go, let's go, let's go. President Trump promised this. Then you have Tom Homan, who's like, look, guys, all right, targeted enforcement. We're going for the worst of the worst, which is, by the way, what Tom Homan has always said all along. We'll get to the others after, but we got to get the worst of the worst. So there's been kind of like this two different approaches within the administration, and that's been the tug of war. So the Bovinos, the Greg Bovinos and the Kristi Noems, and to a degree, Stephen Miller, all kind of sidelined for now because Trump sees this as bad PR, bad optics. And Trump with PR, that's like really first and foremost in his mind. So along comes Tom Homan, who, by the way, let's just be honest, guys, is out of central casting, as we all know. I mean, this guy is something else. So he's coming in and there's going to be a difference. Now, to me, what was interesting in all of this is that, and he said a lot of interesting things during all of his press conference that you see there. The number one thing he said, which is going to drive the left batty, is that the attorney general there, Keith Ellison, agreed that ICE would be allowed to know the release dates of the criminals in the local jails, not the Minnesota penitentiaries. It looks like they're going to get access to the Minnesota penitentiaries, but the actual local jails in Minneapolis, they'll be able to know when illegal criminals are being released. That is huge. I mean, that goes against everything that Jacob Fry and Tim Walz and other sanctuary city officials and these protesters have stood for. They don't want ICE going into the local jails. Well, if what Tom Homan says actually comes to fruition, that is going to go into smelling salts territory for liberals. They are not going to be happy whatsoever with the fact that Fry and Walz would comply on something like that. We will see. That's what I'm looking for in the future. We'll see really if indeed they'll be able to get into the local jails, because that's a game changer, guys.
So just to clarify, David, so these folks who are in the local jails, these are people who have committed criminal offenses aside from just being in the country illegally.
That's correct. These are the old worst of the worst, if you will. I mean, these are the folks that are in jails, and that this is the rub, guys, real quick. What Tom Homan said is that they were promised, Homan and the guys were promised that ICE would be able to know the release dates when these folks get out. or when they're allowed to get out. Well, what does that mean exactly? I've talked to a couple people there that follow this pretty closely who say, well, just because you know the release date doesn't mean you're going to be able to get them. It could become a foot chase at that point. Okay, they're released, go. And now where are they? So who knows exactly how that's going to go down?
Dan, Minnesota being the flashpoint for immigration enforcement in 2026 was not on my bingo card, I think, when the year got started. When you're thinking of all the different places in the country where we've been having these conversations about illegal immigration and immigration enforcement, Minnesota would not have been the first place I would have selected. And yet here we are. It appears also that the protests and the outrage that we have seen over these last few weeks in the wakes of the deaths of Renee Good and Alex Preddy has forced this change. First of all, do you agree with that? What kind of effect do you think the protests have had in the recalibration that we're now seeing from the White House? And how much damage has been done, do you think, as David mentioned, from a PR standpoint with regard to the Trump administration's plans for mass deportation?
Yeah, I mean, I think David was right. Trump views things as PR, and he has a good sense on that. And he sees that it's not the best PR right now. But at the same time, I don't know exactly. I saw some polls that people were going through that showed that there's when you word it like illegal immigrants and and you use that language in the polling, that there's still support for the initiative to remove and deport these illegal immigrants. And there's just the debate is on how are you doing that. And I think honestly, when you look at the numbers, and Obama had deported, I think more than any in a year than any Trump year so far. And so Obama was doing this with ICE, and there was no protest about it whatsoever. And I think the Trump administration decided to, and I think they're trying to send a message potentially around the world to would-be immigrants that you're going to get deported if you come here. And so they've been very visual about what they're doing. And then you look at these protests, and why Minnesota? Who knows? But it feels like whatever operatives decided to make it Minnesota, it's been Minnesota. This has been very obviously organized.
Yep.
This is not just, someone saw ICE driving down their street and so they're mad and then they jump out. This is so blatantly organized. I think even Tim Walz, one of his campaign people, was caught up, doing one of these signal chats and telling people where to go. It's overly organized, and it's very intentional. And I think to me, that's the frustrating thing about this, is it almost seems like these leftist agitators, or even if they're not leftist and they're just anti-ICE, want these confrontations. It seems like they're trying to make these. I mean, you look at, regardless of how we feel about the moment that Alex Preddy got shot, look at all the interactions before. I mean, spitting, kicking on the cars. Like, he's not the only one doing that. They're all doing this. Like, who does this on a protest unless you're trying to provoke some sort of response? Why can't you just even be on the corner of the street and just stand there with your sign? Like, there's so much of this instigating and trying to provoke these reactions that, I look at all of those things. I look at these Democratic operatives helping to organize this and stir people up. And then, and there is legitimate disagreement with this. But it feels like that's being stoked and that's being used. And when I look at all of those facts on the ground, I can't help but thinking this is what some people want to happen, unfortunately.
And here's the thing. Let's remember, and I agree, Dan, that a lot of this is these folks are being they're either being paid, or if they're not being paid, they're definitely
being used.
They're being shuttled in, for sure. A lot of these folks don't live in Minnesota. I mean, you can look at the independent reporting on this. I mean, that's just true. Now, having said that, to be clear, there are some folks in Minneapolis that are not happy with what's going on. Okay, so it's a smorgasbord. Okay, but let's not discount that portion of it, that this is a leftist playbook situation and it's being done by certain leftist groups. I mean, that's definitely happening. I do want to say this, that they are provoking ICE, and here's the main reason why. Not only why do they want the confrontation? Well, they want it because chaos is part of the rules for radicals. It's a Salvinsky playbook situation. But beyond all of that, they know that Walz and Fry and the local officials there have their back. So why not? I mean, Walz was the one that's saying go out and videotape it, protest it. He never said stay 60 feet away, stay 100 feet away, stay 200 feet away. He said videotape it. So going forward, I'm curious to see what kind of rules of engagement are going to be agreed upon by Walz and Fry to say, hey, say to your protester friends, if you will, time to invoke some sort of a COVID rule, 6 feet away. How about 60 feet away? How about 100 feet away? I mean, what are you going to do there? That has to be part of the calculus here.
Yeah, and then I'll just add one more thing. The rhetoric that Fry and Walz and others use is not just, hey, go make your voice be heard. It's get them out of Minnesota. These are Nazis. We need to get them out. Like,
right.
These are the same people that complained about one word Trump said on January 6th and tried to take that into him getting a whole people to go and protest. And they can't see the inconsistency there here while you're telling people you've got Nazis running around your neighborhood and you need to get them out. Mm-hmm. Either it is incitement or it isn't. You can't have it both ways.
And one last thing on that, Nazis, so to speak, running around the neighborhoods. Okay, first of all, they're not Nazis, but beyond all that, why are they in the neighborhoods to begin with? Because they can't get into the local jails and get the worst of the worst. That's the whole point. They're having to go whack-a-mole around the neighborhoods to try and find these folks because these local officials in that sanctuary city won't let ICE do their job in the local jails. That's the problem. Now we hopefully will see that the local jails, they'll cooperate with it, letting ICE go into local jails. And even Homan has said at that point, we don't need to be going around the neighborhoods. We'll do targeted enforcement, which was the point all along. Do you think the Trump administration and ICE and all these folks really wanted to make it to see this? You might say, well, yeah, they wanted this. Well, hold on. They didn't want the PR that went with this. They didn't want the PR at all that went with this. But this is what they're forced into doing because they're not getting cooperation from local officials.
So let me jump in here because we just so that's a competing thing to what Dan was just saying a second ago. Dan, you were saying that the Trump administration is only too happy, or not, I'm going to paraphrase. You didn't say only too happy, but that the optics of what ICE has been doing and the way they've been going about conducting these searches in these neighborhoods is sort of to act as a deterrent to people around the world seeing it, to not even bother trying to come into the country illegally. And yet, the blame for the interactions that we're seeing seems to be laying squarely on the shoulder of the protests and the protesters who are organized, and that the way ICE has been conducting these raids, mistakenly going into the Ecuadorian consulate and trying to get access to the Ecuadorian consulate in Minneapolis, not realizing that's what it was, but randomly going door to door and staking out schools and all those kinds of things. That's not solely because of what the protesters are doing. That's part of the game plan that the Trump administration and that ICE and Border Patrol have wanted to do because, like you said, David, they haven't been able to get access to the jails. And the thinking is that if that happens, then you don't need to do those kinds of things. But that it also is, yes, we want to show the rest of the world, if you come to the country illegally, we're going to go find wherever you are and pull you out and send you back home. So there seems to me an inconsistency in the argument there between what ICE is doing on the ground and how much of that is the responsibility of the protests and the protesters.
Yes, you're right. Go ahead, Dan, please.
I mean, maybe I'm just not picking up what you're putting down there on the inconsistency. I still think the protesters, have every right to protest, but it's when you start trying to impede and stop things, that's what I have a problem with. That's what I think is the biggest issue right now. Like, just them standing out on the street corner with their signs is probably not going to be enough to garner interest. So, this happens again and again and again with leftist leaning protests. They always turn this way. They always turn violent. They always start throwing rocks at the cars and everything else. So, I mean, maybe I'm just missing I think I'm missing what you're putting down there. But, as far as the inconsistency, I mean, to me, the protesters crossing the line into peacefully protesting, into not peacefully protesting is the issue. And as far as the Trump thing, I think Trump is seeing that it's escalated now and it just doesn't look good to the general person, watching this stuff. And so he's trying to do something. But initially when they started, you had Kristi Noem dressing up in ICE gear and everything else going out there because I think they wanted to look tough. So how it started and how it's going is kind of what I was
I
would be
think what
going forward.
John is saying is that you can't let the Trump administration off the hook here because they wanted to show that this was going to be a show of force regardless, and showing up. You mentioned the Ecuador building. I'm not quite sure which building you're referring to, but and other places and schools. And so here's the thing. Yeah, this is what I said at the beginning. This is the Kristi Noem, Corey Lewandowski, Stephen Miller approach, which is like, let's go, let's do a little bit more of those at-large raids, and that hasn't worked. So yes, would they prefer to go into local jails and do this targeted to begin with? Yes, but I still think, to your point, John, there has been this desire by Stephen Miller at the White House and Kristi Noem and Lewandowski have carried this out to say we're going to go broader, and it hasn't quite worked, and Trump has seen that, and that's why Homan's in to just do the targeted enforcement.
And talking a little bit about Kristi Noem, and I want to focus on her specifically for just a second, David. She's had to answer some hard questions this week, especially since she's no longer one of the people running point in Minneapolis. I saw her doing an interview with Sean Hannity on Fox News on Thursday night, and he asked her about her comments. It was about an hour or so after the Preddy video first started getting around online and making the rounds online, calling him a domestic terrorist and there was a talk initially by Noem and others in the administration about he was brandishing his weapon, and of course he had a concealed carry and 2 extra magazines. I want to get to that aspect of it in a second, but given kind of some of the calls by Tom Tillis and Lisa Murkowski outright calling for her to resign and step down, Republican senators, is she in trouble? Is she in danger of losing her position as head of DHS?
I don't think so. Not right now, according to my sources, not right this moment. Having said that, obviously, if we noticed this week at the cabinet meeting, she wasn't called upon. He had a 2-hour cabinet meeting and didn't go to her around the table. Now, granted, he didn't go to some other cabinet members too, but that was kind of interesting. No, I don't think so at this point. But look, I think this kind of goes to a bigger issue, and that's the narrative issue, right? In other words, both sides love to create the narrative, and Kristi Noem came out and got ahead of her skis, domestic terrorists and all this, and we start to see more information come that might not necessarily be the case. Though there is this now video of Alex Preddy in another video that we know from January 11th or 12th, a couple of weeks before that, showing that he was clearly an agitator with ICE. So there's that. Anyhow, the point is that she may have gotten ahead of her skis for sure, but look at what happened on the left. I mean, they were calling Alex Preddy. I mean, I was ready for him to be canonized. I mean, he was a saint, this ICU nurse, and it turns out, that was the most wonderful guy since sliced bread. And then we see this video that came out that he was spitting on ice and hitting out a taillight and everything. So everybody loves to jump to their conclusions, and that's why I always said at the beginning, let's wait and see and let the dust settle and go from there.
Dan, one other aspect of this is the conversation about the Second Amendment that's risen in the wake of the Alex Preddy shooting specifically. He was carrying a loaded firearm and had 2 extra rounds on him. He had a concealed carry permit, so it was legal for him to carry, as a lot of Second Amendment advocates have noted. But you heard FBI Director Kash Patel, you heard the president himself saying that he didn't like the fact he had a gun, that you shouldn't bring a gun. We've heard other Republican members of Congress say you shouldn't bring a gun to a protest. It's a dangerous thing. And listen, everybody's going to have their own thoughts about the wisdom of bringing a weapon to a protest in a situation like this. I mean, I certainly have mine. It's not something that I would do. I'm not a concealed carry guy to begin with, but I mean, the argument from the Second Amendment people is that he had a legal right to carry, and for the Trump administration and officials to say that you're probably going to there's a good chance you'll get shot, or there's a good chance you'll get hurt if you bring a gun to something like this. They didn't say right out that he had it coming, but there was that intimation that, like, you're playing with fire if you do this. And a lot of Second Amendment folks are up in arms about this, about what the Trump administration has been saying regarding the concealed carry that Alex Preddy had. So I'm curious how important you think the pushback is from the gun rights advocates regarding the Second Amendment and what we saw with Alex Preddy.
Well, I like consistency, and so I think Republicans need to be consistent on this issue. And I think a lot of Republicans, like Dana Lash, is someone who is very knowledgeable on the Second Amendment, and she immediately criticized those comments, and I tend to agree with those criticisms, because the knee-jerk reaction shouldn't be, well, you can't carry a gun out here. What are you doing? No, the conservatives are very much of the inclination to support the Second Amendment and say, yes, he absolutely had a right to have a gun there. Now, beyond, so that language was just incorrect, and I think they got heavily criticized for those on the right, especially from people saying that those initial reactions were incorrect. No, you actually have a right to do that, especially if you're a concealed carry holder. But the other part of that, though, is on Alex's part, you've got to understand, if you're carrying, you have to be extra careful with how you're conducting yourself. You can't be thrown. I don't know if he was carrying in the earlier incident, and and again, we can talk about the justifications of this particular deadly shooting or not. But that's beyond the point. Beyond the point is he should be conducting himself in a way that's extra careful. But the administration, I think, was in the wrong there to immediately jump to that. I mean, you look at Kyle Rittenhouse. Would they have said the same thing about Kyle Rittenhouse? Like, well, you guys, champion him and his defense in the midst of that protest and having a gun there, and they didn't have any problem with that. So, you got to be consistent on
Well, he has a right, right? I mean, the Second Amendment gives him the right to carry the gun. It also comes with a responsibility. And the responsibility, and that's on each one of us who decides to carry a gun in that situation. Alex Preddy decided in that moment to confront and get involved, and he had a right to do that, but it comes with potential consequences, and in this case, it was deadly.
I want to get into one other thing that came down here on Friday, and it's related to the Minneapolis situation. And that is, journalist Don Lemon was taken into custody on Thursday night in connection to a protest at a church in St. Paul, Minnesota. According to his attorney, he was with dozens of anti-immigration and customs enforcement protesters. They all rushed into a church in the Twin Cities in St. Paul earlier this month, interrupting a church service that they said was being led by a pastor who also worked for ICE. The attorney for Don Lemon says that Don has been a journalist for 30 years, and his constitutionally protected work in Minneapolis was no different than what he has always done. The First Amendment exists to protect journalists whose role it is to shine light on the truth and hold those in power accountable. Senior DOJ officials publicly asserted that Lemon would face charges after the incident and that he did not have a right to be on the church's private property. They said interrupting a church service and that they impeded many of the churchgoers' constitutional rights to express their religion. I just want to get your thoughts on this, David.
Well, where do I begin? He should have been charged. The charge is constant. Here it is. It's a conspiracy to deprive rights is what he's been charged with. And what that means, it's a felony. And here's the definition. It's illegal for two or more individuals to conspire to harm, oppress, threaten, or intimidate anyone in their exercise of rights or privileges secured by the U.S. Constitution. Well, there it is. Now, here's some key words here. It says conspire to harm, oppress, threaten, or intimidate. Well, they were definitely being intimidated inside the church. They were definitely being threatened. The conspire, that portion of it, if you look at Don Lemon before he went into the church, he was there with the protesters in the parking lot. This was all coordinated. So, I don't know how you prove intent exactly. All I know is that this was not Don Lemon from CNN, even though he's no longer with CNN. This was not Don Lemon, the journalist. He's pretending to play journalist, or an independent journalist. But what he's doing is he's in advocacy. He's with this group that came in. I mean, you look at the video beforehand, not in the church, but beforehand. I watched him in the parking lot with these protesters. He was ready to go in with them. This was all coordinated. So having said that, yeah, it's a problem. It could be up to 10 years in jail. Could be a fine, depending. And think about it, guys. Imagine the media being up in arms. Think about this. If MAGA extremists, right? Let's just call them MAGA extremists, walked into a mosque and interrupted some sort of service there. I mean,
how about a gay pride parade?
A gay pride. Thank you. Yeah, whatever you want. Do your apples to apples. I mean, the media would be apoplectic. And they would say and the Biden DOJ or any Democrat liberal DOJ would be after those MAGA extremists in a heartbeat. So what's the difference? Someone explain the difference to me. I don't think you can.
Dan, your thoughts?
Yeah, no, a couple things on this, because I don't think we've talked about it yet, but I just thought the behavior of everyone in there that was protesting was disgusting. I just don't know. I just don't know humans that would go do these sorts of things and go in and swearing with kids in there and trying to scare people. Like, it's so ridiculous. And to David's point, if you watch those videos, which I sadly had to watch a bunch of them, of Don Lemon beforehand, he's trying to say he's a journalist. It's just so beyond the pale. Like, he's so clearly working with them. I mean, he's hugging the one person. He's saying, right. I can't tell you what they're going to do because they're going for this is so grassroots. I mean, it was so fake and phony, and he was so clearly with them. One guy at one point doesn't realize who he is and is like mad at him. And he's like, hey, I'm Don Lemon. I'm with you guys. He says something like, I'm with you guys. I don't remember the exact wording, but it's something like that. And the guy's like, oh, my bad. I'm sorry. And they hug it out. It's like you weren't there, just randomly happened to be there and chronicling this event. Like, you knew this was coming. So as David reads the charges, I mean, it sure seems like the shoe fits, that he certainly seemed to me like he was in. I mean, the judge or the jury will decide that, but certainly seemed like he was in on the planning on this, at least to some degree, and more than willing to show it and to be there and to, harass these people that were in there in this church service at that time. So the whole thing was unfortunate and a massive miscalculation. I think they look horrible for going in there. And listen, if you're going to play the whole FACE Act game and do it to the pro-life people who are outside the clinics, well, enjoy it. Enjoy your FACE Act charges here, because you made that bed. Now you're going to have to sleep in it.
Yeah, I'm no legal expert, but it would seem to me a lot of this hinges on how much of the planning Don Lemon knew about or was involved in ahead of time, because it's obviously, you can get a notification from an organization saying, hey, we're going to go do this. And we've reached out to a couple of media members, whatever their role might be at that point, to cover it. You might be able to say then, as I was a journalist I was invited to cover something as a journalist. But if you are seen, I imagine any kind of defense about this or any kind of prosecution is going to involve emails, right? I mean, most of these things, you're probably going to get a chance to look at email traffic between Don Lemon and any of the organizers of this sort of thing. And if there's a sense that they're in cahoots, I would imagine that would chip away at the argument that Don Lemon is acting as an independent journalist in this situation.
Yeah,
but
I tend to agree.
That's just that is my non-legalese expert.
And what does in cahoots mean, right? I mean, that's going to be determined.
Well, it might be tough it might be tough to physically prove unless there's a smoking gun email. Right. But I mean, like, where there's smoke, there's fire. When you add up all those clips that were there, I mean, it didn't look like a typical, the nonpartisans they do have at CNN or wherever that are out there. It did not feel like that at all.
One last thing before we wrap up, and it's an important topic, and I think it's one that might be ramping up here over the next week or two, and that is Iran. President Trump is warning that Iran is, quote, running out of time to strike a nuclear deal, and that a massive armada, using his words, of U.S. ships is heading toward the region. He added that failure to negotiate could lead to a military attack, quote, far worse than the last one. His remarks are coming amid some increased tensions. Of course, there have been all of these protests that were taking place over in Iran for weeks. The Iranian regime was violently quelling those attacks by killing thousands of protesters. Of course, the president was threatening to launch strikes on Iran 2 weeks ago but then he came out the next day after it seemed like they were on the precipice of doing this, saying, we're not going to go forward with this. They say that they've stopped the killing. And so he was trying to, I think, let some temperatures cool while he considered other options. But Dan, I guess I want to start with you on this. Does this sound like saber rattling to you, or do you believe the president really is itching to strike Iran militarily?
don't know if he's itching to do it, but I'm hesitant to describe anything President Trump does on this front as saber rattling, just given what we've seen in the past few
Fair.
months. You know,
fair.
you know, we with Maduro just getting yanked right out of his compound, and you know, with Iran getting, you know, the strike we did there last year. I would think it's I would take, if I'm Iran, I'm taking that very seriously and not viewing it as saber rattling. So I don't know that he's itching to strike, but I feel like if he's throwing out these warnings, I'm inclined to believe he's serious about it.
Now, he's definitely serious. I wouldn't be surprised if something happened this weekend. When I say something, I don't know what the something is, but it's something militarily. I think he's definitely going to do it. I say it. Once again, I'll get back to you on the it. I think we'll all find out what the it is at some point, but it's going to be something. And I think it's all as a catalyst to provoke the regime change. You know, it'll be cloaked in, hey, you know, you're not coming to the table on the nuclear weapon situation, all that. But what this really is all about is making sure that whatever it is takes care of the regime in terms of getting folks there to be able to finally put the death knell in the regime, the Iranian regime's coffin, if you will. And I think that's what this is all about. So yeah, I think it'll happen. And by the way, I know there's been talk about MAGA and, you know, the split and whether or not they support this. Let's make this very, very clear. MAGA definitely supports this. The polling bears that out. 61% of MAGA. That's a pretty decent majority, especially in this day and age. But about 61% of MAGA fully support what the president might have to do militarily in Iran, whatever that is. They support that. And that's pretty significant. I think now it's not 80 to 90% of MAGA. So if you want to call it a split, that's fine. But 61%, the majority of MAGA agree. Got to understand, you know, everybody, when they think MAGA, you know, I think, where does your mind go to? I think some people go to Marjorie Taylor Greene, they go to Steve Bannon, they go to Tucker Carlson, they go to the loudest voices, okay? But they are a minority of MAGA, okay? This is the isolationist wing. This is the, you know, pure America first, non-interventionist, isolationist, total, that's them. That's 10 to 15% of MAGA, okay? That is not the majority of MAGA. Majority of MAGA, quite frankly, are, how do I say this? A lot of them are baby boomers. A lot of them are older Gen X that are basically former Bush supporters that didn't like what Bush did, but now trust Trump to do what they need to do from a targeted standpoint, not a nation building standpoint, but a little bit more of a different view of the Western Hemisphere and a Monroe Doctrine. That's really what MAGA is. And a lot of people misunderstand. They just think it's a Tucker party or it's a Steve Bannon party. It's not. It's not. Now, once again, to be clear, Bannon does represent, you know, a portion of MAGA, but it's not the majority of MAGA. And that's very important to understand.
You know, I think one other aspect of this, and that is something Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu reportedly a couple of weeks ago did not want the president to move forward with the strikes because he and other Arab allies of the United States have been saying it'll take more than just airstrikes to force a regime change. So what the president is saying here is that he wants to inspire protesters to continue protesting with airstrikes. And I guess if because it doesn't sound like, as much as you say 60 some odd % of MAGA is in favor of regime change in Iran. I guess I wonder to what end, like the methods to which that would have to happen. Like, I mean, I can't imagine sending U.S. troops into Iran, but I mean, if you want a regime change, can that happen through protests that we saw that were pretty significant a few weeks ago, but have since kind of died down? There would have to be something, I would imagine, really, really sustained. It's just hard to see the mechanism in which this happens.
Well, you take out the IRGC strongholds, you know, that's number one. And the other part of it is the besiege over there, right? I mean, those civilian patrols that are all around this huge country of Iran, especially in the Tehran area and some of the other big cities, you've got to take out the besiege. Now, just to be clear, what we're talking about with the besiege, these are folks, these are like civilians inside Iran who are working for the Iranian regime, but they're in civilian plain clothes. I mean, it's not like military, they're not going around in military uniforms. All right.
Right.
And the minute the besiege in all of these different locations and jurisdictions, they're in the schools, they're in the mosque, they're in this and that. The minute they turn on the regime, then you're going to have regime change. That's how this is going to go down.
Well, we'll see if your prediction of this weekend comes true, David. And we'll be back next week to talk more about it. In the meantime, thanks everybody for watching. For David Brody, Dan Andrews, this has been Navigating Trump 2.0.
Thanks, John. And by the way, if it doesn't come true, don't have me back. Thank you.
No chance.